In
doing
3 seconds,
exactly
the
what you
CEO
say and you
signed,
let it continue.
"Help me.
That is
He has a
absolutely
weapon."
not true.
And the
I
only
take
man
my
who saw it
responsibilities
was the
very
man no one
seriously.
ever noticed. The crystal chandeliers of the Whitmore Grand scattered light across the marble floor like shards of glass. The lobby was designed to reassure, polished, quiet, controlled. A place where nothing ugly was supposed to happen. Constance Whitmore walked through it as if she owned the air itself. She had built this hotel, every curve, every reflection, every illusion of calm. The Whitmore Grand was the crown of her 12-city empire, a place where power wore silk gloves and danger was politely escorted elsewhere. But today her steps were not her own. Leon Hale moved beside her, half a step behind, his hand resting lightly at the small of her back. To the guests watching, it looked courteous, almost intimate. Only Constance felt the truth. Beneath the tailored wool of his jacket, something cold pressed into her spine. Not enough to hurt, just enough to instruct. No screaming, no running, no mistakes. "Smile," Leon murmured pleasantly. "We're just talking business." Luxury, Constance realized, was the perfect cage. In a five-star lobby, panic looked inappropriate. A scream would be judged before it was believed. And hesitation, killed. They passed the concierge desk, past guests arguing softly over reservations, past employees trained to preserve calm at all costs. Then Constance saw him, the janitor. He stood near the desk, mopping the marble in slow, steady strokes. A yellow caution sign beside him, sleeves rolled, head down. Unremarkable in every way people were trained not to see. His name came to her dimly from a schedule report she'd skimmed months ago. Silas Henry. She had never spoken to him. Not once. Leon's hand pressed slightly harder into her back. "Don't," he warned softly. Constance didn't turn, didn't slow, didn't let her face change. She took one step, then another, and then, without breaking stride, she let her hand fall naturally to her side. Her fingers moved, small, precise, invisible. "Help me." The sign took less than a second. Silas's mop froze mid-stroke. Water pooled silently at his feet. But he did not look up. He didn't lift his head, didn't meet her eyes, didn't betray recognition with panic. Because Silas Henry had survived long enough to learn a rule the powerful never needed. Invisible people stay alive by staying still. His eyes remained on the floor, on the reflection. The marble mirrored Constance's hand perfectly. Her fingers formed the next words. "He has a weapon." A pause. Then the last instruction. "Don't look up." Silas felt his stomach tighten. Every instinct screamed to look, to confirm, to react. But the final sign wasn't fear. It was command. If he looked up, Leon would notice. If Leon noticed, someone would die. So Silas kept mopping. Slow, controlled, invisible. Inside him, memory stirred. Not of danger, but of a kitchen table years ago. Of small hands moving carefully through the air. Of a child whose world was built not from sound, but from attention. Matilda, 7 years old, deaf, his daughter. Silas had learned sign language out of necessity, not heroism. When your child cannot hear you call her name, you learn to watch reflections, shadows, movements others ignore. Silence, he had learned, was never empty. Leon guided Constance away from the crowds toward the VIP elevators. His briefcase hung heavy at his side. Silas felt the moment settle into his bones. If he did nothing, she would disappear into a private space. If he acted recklessly, the weapon would speak. He thought of Matilda waiting after school, thought of a promise made years ago beside a hospital bed. Bring her home, every night. He also thought of another promise, quieter but heavier. Never look away when someone asks for help, especially when they cannot ask out loud. Silas finished the stroke and leaned his mop against the wall. He picked up the yellow caution sign and placed it directly in Leon and Constance's path. Wet floor, slippery surface, a small inconvenience, a polite delay. Leon frowned. This hotel has excellent maintenance, like he said, irritation cracking his calm. Silas did not respond, did not apologize, did not look up. Leon tightened his grip on Constance's arm and redirected her toward the secondary hallway. And as they vanished from the main lobby, Silas turned, quietly, deliberately, toward the service corridor. Toward the phone with the three-digit number no one remembered unless something had already gone wrong. The choice had been made. Silas Henry was no longer just cleaning floors, he was buying time. And in a building designed to preserve appearances, time was the one thing a man like Leon Hale could not afford to lose. Silas Henry pushed his cart into the service corridor as if nothing in the world had changed. The hallway was narrow, lit by fluorescent strips that hummed faintly overhead. The walls were scuffed from years of deliveries and hurried footsteps, the kind of place guests never saw and executives forgot existed. It smelled of cleaning solution and warm metal. Silas liked it here. Service corridors told the truth. They showed how a building actually worked, not how it wanted to be seen. He kept his pace steady. Too fast would draw attention. Too slow would look deliberate. In places like this, survival lived in rhythm. Behind him, somewhere beyond the marble and chandeliers, Constance Whitmore was being guided deeper into the hotel by a man with a gun. Silas did not let himself imagine the details. Fear wasted time. Precision saved it. He turned into a small supply alcove and pulled the door, almost closed, leaving a narrow gap. Shelves lined the walls, stacked with folded towels, bottles of cleaner, spare bulbs. Ordinary things. Reliable things. He picked up the phone mounted to the wall. 3 digits. His fingers hovered for a fraction of a second before dialing. As the line rang, his thoughts drifted, not backward into panic, but sideways into habit, into memory shaped by repetition rather than emotion. Mornings with Matilda always began the same way. She sat at the kitchen table, legs swinging, watching his hands while he packed her lunch. Not because she was hungry yet, but because hands were where meaning lived. She had learned early that mouths were unreliable. Silas had learned with her. American Sign Language at first, then the private shorthand families developed over time. A tap on the wrist meant pay attention. A hand over the heart meant you're safe. A tug on the earlobe meant I love you. When your child could not hear you call her name, you learned to see differently. You learned to notice reflections in windows, shadows on walls, vibrations through the floor. Silence was not absence. It was information. Security, a voice answered. Silas lowered his tone automatically. Calm traveled farther than urgency if you let it. This is Silas Henry, he said. Day shift maintenance. A pause. This is Audrey Finn, the voice replied. What do you need? Silas chose his words carefully. The CEO is in danger, he said. She signed to me. The man with her is armed. Another pause, longer this time. Signed? Audrey asked. Sign language, Silas said. She told me not to look up. She said he's forcing her to sign a contract. The line went quiet. Silas waited. He knew this silence. It was the sound of a professional shifting gears. I'm pulling the camera feeds now, Audrey said at last. Where are you? Service corridor behind the main lobby, Silas replied. I'm not approaching them. Good, Audrey said. Don't. Her voice sharpened. I see them. Secondary hallway. He's keeping his right hand inside his jacket. Silas closed his eyes briefly. That's consistent with concealment, he said. If he senses intervention, he'll isolate her. That's what I'm afraid of, Audrey replied. I'm initiating a silent response. No alarms? No public engagement. Police? Silas asked. Staging 3 blocks away. No sirens. No lights. Silas nodded even though she couldn't see him. Years ago, this kind of coordination had been his life. Before Matilda. Before hospital rooms and whispered promises. Before he traded risk assessments for mop buckets. He had been good at that life. Too good. He had learned to read posture, predict movement, calculate how fear traveled through a room. Then his wife got sick. Cancer arrived quietly and took everything loudly. After the funeral, Silas quit the work that demanded hardness when all he had left was softness he needed to protect. He needed a job that let him come home every night. So he became invisible. But invisibility did not erase training, it only hid it. Silas, Audrey said, I need you to help me buy time. Tell me how, he replied. We'll redirect traffic in the lobby. Bridget is with us. I need legitimate delays along the VIP route. Nothing that looks intentional. Silas glanced at the narrow hallway, the elevator controls he passed every day, the maintenance panel he knew how to adjust without triggering alarms. I can do that, he said. You're sure? Audrey asked. Yes, Silas replied. This building tells me everything if I listen. Stay on this channel, Audrey said. And Silas, thank you. He ended the call and stepped back into the corridor. The hotel continued breathing around him, unaware. Luggage wheels rolled, doors opened and closed. Somewhere a guest laughed. Silas pushed his cart forward, posture relaxed, expression neutral. At the elevator bank, he pressed the service button and frowned slightly, as if noticing a minor problem. With a small adjustment, one that required knowledge, not force, he activated maintenance mode. Nothing dramatic happened. That was the point. Anyone trying to use the elevators would now need clearance. It wouldn't stop them. It would slow them. Make them choose. Time, Silas knew, was leverage. He moved to a position near a decorative mirror and waited. Through the reflection, he saw Leon and Constance approach. Leon pressed the button. Nothing happened. Irritation flickered across his face. Is this normal? Leon asked. Constance kept her voice calm. Occasionally. We can take the service stairs. Leon hesitated. Something felt wrong to him now. Too quiet. Too smooth. Fine, he said. Stairs. They turned. Silas stepped away smoothly and headed toward the front desk. Bridget Louisa looked up, her professional smile never faltering even as recognition flashed in her eyes. He's taking her to the service stairs, Silas said quietly. Bridget's fingers flew across the keyboard. Audrey sees it, she murmured. I'll keep the lobby busy. She straightened and raised her voice just enough to welcome a group of arriving guests, creating a buffer of normalcy that wrapped the space like insulation. Silas returned to the service hallway. Above him, a woman was walking toward a private room with a gun and a pen waiting on the table. Below him, security was moving without sound. Silas positioned his cart to partially narrow the corridor. Not enough to block it, just enough to control movement. He knelt by an outlet, removed the cover plate, and pretended to inspect wiring. To anyone watching the cameras, he was doing his job. To Audrey Finn, he was marking his ground. The building was holding its breath. Silas felt the familiar calm settle over him, the kind that arrived only when fear had been replaced by purpose. He did not know how this would end. He only knew that he would not look away. And that sometimes, the language that saved lives did not use sound at all. The service stairwell swallowed Constance Whitmore in silence. Concrete replaced marble. Fluorescent light hummed where chandeliers once performed. The air was cooler here, stripped of fragrance and illusion. Each step echoed too clearly, her heels betraying her presence in a space never meant for ceremony. Leon Hale stayed close behind her now. No more polite distance, no more illusion of partnership. Keep walking, he said quietly. Don't slow down. Constance adjusted her pace by instinct, just enough to remain compliant, just enough to think. She had spent her life understanding leverage. Right now, leverage was measured in seconds. She did not look back. She did not speak. She listened to the building. Behind the stairwell door, the hotel divided itself into layers. Above them, a conference room waited, glass walls, city view, a contract already laid out like a verdict. Below them, security staff repositioned without sound. Cameras watched, systems logged every anomaly. Between them, a man with a weapon and a woman pretending she still controlled her future. And somewhere unseen, a janitor counted angles instead of prayers. Silas Henry had stopped moving. He stood at the bend of the service corridor, body angled so the cameras read him as idle but compliant. His cart narrowed the hallway just enough to shape movement. It was not obstruction, it was suggestion. Audrey Finn's voice came softly through the radio at his belt. They're on the stairs. VIP floor in 20 seconds. Silas pressed the button twice in response. No words. No waste. He knelt beside the wall and removed an outlet cover plate, fingers steady. To any observer, he was routine maintenance. To Audrey, he was signaling position and readiness. You're calm, Audrey said quietly. I have to be, Silas replied. He's not nervous yet. He will be, Audrey said. Yes, Silas agreed. That's when things get dangerous. Years ago, he had learned that fear did not explode. It tightened. It shortened decision windows. It made people rush. Silas glanced at the metal tool tray resting on his cart. Heavy enough to be loud. Harmless enough to look accidental. Not yet, he thought. Not yet. On the VIP floor, Leon guided Constance down a carpeted hallway so thick it swallowed sound. Art lined the walls, curated calm, chosen to suggest authority without intimacy. At the end waited a glass-walled conference room. Leon opened the door and gestured. Please. The courtesy was gone now. Only control remained. Constance entered. The room smelled faintly of leather and ozone. A portfolio sat centered on the table, its position deliberate. Leon closed the door and stood between her and the exit. Inside, he said, is a contract already approved by your board. Constance sat slowly. She opened the portfolio. Forged signatures stared back at her, names she recognized. People who had smiled at her across this very table. If you sign, Leon continued, control transfers immediately. Your position becomes ceremonial. You resign within the week. And if I don't? Constance asked. Leon's hand shifted inside his jacket. Then this becomes unpleasant. Constance nodded as if absorbing terms, not threats. May I read? She asked. Leon inclined his head. Briefly. She turned the pages slowly. Not because she hoped to find mercy there, but because each second mattered. Outside the room, Silas watched the closed door reflected in a decorative glass panel. He could see Leon's silhouette positioned between Constance and freedom. Audrey's voice returned. Police are staged. Ronnie is recording everything. How long? Silas asked. Minutes. Silas exhaled once. Controlled. Inside the room, Constance reached the final page. Leon leaned forward. Enough. She picked up the pen. Her hand hovered. Before I sign, she said calmly, answer one question. Leon's eyes narrowed. Be quick. How did you access my grandfather's sealed debt records? She asked. Those files were locked 40 years ago. Leon smiled, satisfied now. Information doesn't disappear, he said. It waits. I've been planning this for 3 years. 3 years. Constance felt the weight of it settle. This was not a lone criminal. This was architecture. Her fingers shifted beneath the table, hidden from Leon's view. She formed the signs slowly, deliberately, knowing only one person would see. Help now. Close. Silas saw it instantly. His pulse jumped, but his hands did not. This is it, he murmured into the radio. Audrey's reply was immediate. Ready. Silas stood, lifted the metal tray, and let it fall. The sound exploded down the hallway, sharp, violent, impossible to ignore. Leon's head snapped toward the door. Silas dropped to one knee at once, gathering tools, muttering apologies like a man embarrassed by his own clumsiness. 5 seconds. That was all it took. Audrey Finn and 2 officers appeared at the far end of the hallway, weapons drawn, movements precise, voices silent. Inside the conference room, Leon's hand came free of his jacket. Constance watched the reflection in the glass. Silas met her eyes for the first time. He signed one word. Down. Constance did not hesitate. She dropped beneath the table as the door burst open and the illusion of control finally broke. Silence ended, and consequence began. Constance Whitmore hit the carpet hard. The impact stole her breath, a sharp, private pain she had no time to acknowledge. She curled inward beneath the table, palms pressed flat against the floor, cheek grazing the cool weave of the carpet. Above her, the room fractured into sound. Boots, a chair scraping back, a voice breaking into command. And then the lights went out. Darkness collapsed the space, not the gentle dim of evening. the kind that erased edges, the kind that demanded choice. For 3 seconds, the conference room ceased to be a symbol of power and became what it had always been, a box. Leon Hale swore, the word torn loose by surprise rather than fear. His hand came free of his jacket, the weapon finally visible as he pivoted toward the doorway, trying to find angles in a room that had just lost them. "Police," a voice said, firm and close. "Drop the weapon." Leon fired once. The sound was concussive, flattening the air. A brief flash tore a white scar across the dark as the bullet shattered the glass on the far wall. Splinters rained down like startled birds. The miss mattered. Hands were on Leon immediately, 2 points of force, practiced and precise. The weapon was wrenched away, skittering across the floor. Leon went down hard, breath exploding from his chest as cuffs snapped closed around his wrists. The lights returned. Brightness flooded the room with no ceremony, revealing what had been hidden by urgency. A table skewed on its legs, a chair overturned, glass webbing the window. Leon lay face down, pinned, shouting about lawyers and mistakes and promises that would be honored by morning. No one listened. Audrey Finn stood with her weapon trained, eyes already scanning for second threats, her posture calm as a metronome. One officer secured the firearm, another checked Leon's pockets with methodical care. "Clear," Audrey said. The word carried weight. Constance stayed still for one more heartbeat, trusting the discipline that had just saved her. Then she crawled out from beneath the table and rose slowly. Her knees trembled, she ignored them. Her hands shook, she let them. She was alive. Audrey approached without touching her. "Are you injured?" Constance shook her head. "No." Her voice surprised her with its steadiness. Leon was hauled upright, still shouting, still trying to stitch power back together with volume. Ronnie George stood in the doorway, tablet lifted, footage already rolling, parking garage, stairwell, hallway, the room itself, each second annotated and time-stamped. There would be no ambiguity. Leon's story had ended the moment the lights went out. As he was escorted away, Constance watched him go. Not with triumph, but with a clear-eyed understanding that chilled her more than fear ever had. This had not been impulse. It had been design. A system meant to close quietly, to use legality like a blade, to leave her standing in the same place with less authority and no proof of violence. A pen instead of a bullet. Control disguised as civility. Systems, she knew now, were more dangerous than men. A detective arrived within minutes, voice calm, questions efficient. Constance answered them without dramatics, pausing only when he asked how she had signaled for help. "You used sign language?" he said, a flicker of surprise breaking through his neutrality. "Yep," Constance replied. "I learned the basics years ago." "For work?" "For children," she said. "And today, it worked." He nodded, making a note. The janitor understood immediately. "He was watching the floor," Constance said. "Not me." The detective looked at the marble beyond the glass wall as if seeing it for the first time. An hour later, Constance stood alone in her office. The city had begun to glow beneath the windows, lights spreading like constellations she had never bothered to map. Her hands still trembled as she poured water. The glass clinked softly against itself. She had nearly died in a building she owned, surrounded by systems she trusted, saved by a man she had never spoken to. The irony did not amuse her. A knock sounded. "Ms. Whitmore," Audrey said from the doorway. "District Attorney Elias Corbin is here." Elias Corbin entered with the practiced gravity of someone who dealt in consequences. He laid out the facts without spectacle. Leon Hale was funded through a shell corporation with organized crime ties. He had inside help, access codes, schedules, sealed financial records copied months in advance. "There will be more arrests," Elias said. "This wasn't a solo operation." Constance absorbed it without blinking. "You'll have my cooperation." Elias hesitated. "Most executives ask what this will do to their stock." "If my company can't survive the truth," Constance said, "it doesn't deserve to." When he left, she didn't return to email or calls. She stood at the window instead, pressing her palm to the glass, feeling the city's indifference. For years, she had believed distance kept her safe. That hierarchy reduced risk. That separation created control. Distance had nearly killed her. She asked for Silas Henry. They found him on the third floor, cleaning a spill no one remembered making. Bridget delivered the message with a gentleness that hadn't been there before. "The CEO would like to see you." Silas nodded, set the sign upright, and followed. The executive level felt different in daylight. Quiet, carpet-swallowing sound, walls holding their breath. Silas walked without ceremony, aware of the contrast between this space and the concrete stairwell where everything had changed. Constance stood when he entered. She didn't extend her hand, she offered a chair. "Please," she said. "Sit." Silas did, careful, cuffs still damp from work. "I owe you my life," Constance said without preamble, "and an apology." Silas met her gaze. "You don't owe me anything." "I owe you acknowledgement," she replied. "You worked here 3 years. I never learned your name." Silas accepted it without bitterness. "Most people don't." "I did today," Constance said, "because you saw me when I needed to be seen." Silas thought of Matilda, of hands learning meaning because sound had failed them. "You asked for help," he said simply. There wasn't time not to answer. Constance nodded, something loosening behind her ribs. "The police told me you learned sign language for your daughter." "Yet, she's deaf?" "Yes." "And because you learned her language," Constance said, "you understood mine." Silas didn't correct her. He rose, assuming the meeting was over. Constance stopped him. "I'm going to change how this place works," she said. "Not with plaques or speeches. With systems." Silas paused. "Good." The word carried no praise, only expectation. Constance felt it settle where fear had been. Outside, the city continued its indifference. Inside, something had shifted that would not be easily put back. The lights in the conference room had come back on, but the darkness had already done its work. Constance Whitmore did not go home that night. When the executive floor finally emptied and the phone stopped ringing, she remained in her office, lights dimmed, city spread beneath the windows like a living circuit board. Traffic pulsed. Buildings breathed. Somewhere below, people laughed, argued, slept, unaware how close her world had come to ending in a room of glass and leather. She replayed the afternoon with a discipline that bordered on cruelty. The pressure at her back, the calm in Leon's voice, the way the pen had felt heavier than any weapon. And then, always, the image of a man watching a reflection on a marble floor instead of her face. Power, she understood now, had trained her to look forward and upward, never down. At 6:14 a.m., her phone vibrated. Audrey Finn. "They moved him overnight," Audrey said. "Federal hold, no bail." "Good," Constance replied. "There's more," Audrey continued. Elias confirmed an internal involvement. Senior Vice President, Finance, long access history, clean reputation. Constance closed her eyes. Clean reputations were often the most dangerous. "Bring me everything," she said. "No summaries." She ended the call and stood, pressing her palm to the glass. For years, she had believed hierarchy reduced risk. That distance created safety. That if she stayed above the machinery, it would run correctly beneath her. Distance had nearly killed her. By mid-morning, the building felt different, not quieter, sharper. Lawyers moved carefully, voices lowered. Assistants paused before speaking, as if unsure which version of the company now existed. Emails arrived tagged urgent, then sat unanswered. Constance asked for one person, Silas Henry. He arrived an hour later, guided by Bridget, who treated him not as a curiosity, but as someone whose time mattered. He wore the same uniform as always. Same calm. Same unremarkable presence. Constance gestured to the chair across from her desk. "I want to be clear," she said. "What I'm about to say is not charity." Silas nodded. "Good." She slid a folder across the desk. Inside were floor plans, access routes, timestamps, annotations made in a hand that knew how systems failed. "Yesterday exposed something fundamental," Constance said. "The people closest to danger are the least empowered to respond to it." Silas scanned the pages once. He didn't rush. He didn't pretend to be impressed. "You want to fix," he said. "I want a redesign," Constance corrected. I want a silent response framework that works when shouting would make things worse. Silas leaned back slightly. That requires trust. Yada, she said, and authority. He looked at her carefully now. I won't build something decorative, he said. It has to slow situations down, buy time, interrupt certainty. That's exactly what I want, Constance replied. She slid a second document forward on. This is a foundation, she said, for children with disabilities, scholarships, therapy, equipment, long-term support. Silas's breath caught before he could stop it. You're naming it after Matilda, Constance continued, if you allow me. Silas looked down at his hands that had learned a language because silence had demanded it, hands that had just changed the trajectory of a corporation. You don't owe us that, he said quietly. I know, Constance replied. That's why it matters. A third document followed. Director of Employee Safety and Wellness, she said. Direct access to me, authority across departments, flexible hours. Silas let out a short breath that was almost a laugh. I'm a janitor, he said. You're a systems thinker, Constance replied. With lived experience. Degrees can be earned. This can't. Silas didn't answer right away. He thought of Matilda at the kitchen table, of medical bills folded too carefully, of a future measured in small margins. I need time, he said. Take it, Constance replied. But understand this. I'm doing this whether you accept or not. I just want it done right. Silas stood. You'll make people uncomfortable, he said. Constance smiled faintly. I already have. That afternoon, the board met. Constance did not soften the facts. She did not shield names. She presented evidence, logs, transfers, approvals that told a story too precise to argue with. When the senior vice president was escorted out, no one spoke. This will cost us, someone finally said. Yes, Constance replied, and secrecy would have cost more. She adjourned the meeting herself. By evening, the news broke. Headlines framed survival as spectacle, but inside the hotel, something quieter shifted. Employees spoke more openly. Security asked questions instead of issuing instructions. Maintenance staff were consulted, not commanded. Silas went home early. He sat on the floor with Matilda as she lined up her toys in careful rows. He told her about his day with his hands, slowly, clearly. Big building, big changes. She watched him, eyes serious. You help people? She signed. He smiled. Yes. She nodded once, satisfied. I proud. The words landed heavier than any title. The next morning, Silas walked the lobby again. The marble still reflected everything, but he saw it differently now, not as surface, but as signal. From the mezzanine, Constance watched him move through the space. This, she understood, was the cost of seeing. Once your eyes were open, you no longer had the luxury of looking away. Silas Henry did not start by writing policies. He started by walking. Before dawn, before the lobby filled with polished voices and rolling suitcases, he moved through the hotel the way he always had. Quietly, deliberately, without announcing purpose. Service corridors first. Loading docks. Stairwells no guest ever chose unless something had already gone wrong. Buildings, Silas believed, told the truth when they thought no one important was listening. He carried a small notebook in his pocket. Not a tablet, not a phone. Paper forced patience. It made you choose what mattered. A housekeeper showed him a corner near the spa where echoes lingered too long. A night auditor pointed out a camera that had been temporarily offline for months. A bellhop described a VIP who always insisted on private routes and discouraged eye contact. None of it sounded dramatic. That was the danger. Silas sketched lines and arrows late at night at his kitchen table while Matilda colored beside him, her tongue caught between her teeth in concentration. Every so often she glanced up at his hands, curious. What you drawing? She signed. Ways to slow bad things, he replied. She nodded, accepting this as reasonable. Silas understood something Constance was still learning. Safety was not about stopping everything. It was about interrupting momentum. The first rule he wrote down was simple. No one should need to shout to be saved. He designed the system to hide in plain sight, small buttons under desks, maintenance codes that doubled as delay signals, gestures simple enough to learn in minutes, serious enough to matter when seconds collapsed. Help, danger, don't look. Follow me. Not dramatic, not heroic, effective. When he presented the plan, Constance listened without interrupting. How much? She asked. Less than one lawsuit, Silas said. Less than one funeral. She signed the approval immediately. Training began quietly. No mass emails, no banners. Audrey Finn led security sessions that felt more like conversations than briefings. Bridget Louisa taught front desk staff how to create buffers of normalcy, the art of making delay feel like service. Ronnie George adjusted the logging system so small irregularities stayed visible instead of being smoothed away. Silas taught sign language, not fluency, not poetry. Function. Hands learned faster than mouths ever did. Some managers resisted. This will slow operation, the one said. Yes, Silas replied calmly. Speed belongs to the person who wants control. The room went quiet. 3 weeks later, Elias Corbin called. They're charging him, he said. The senior vice president took the deal. He gave us everything. Constance closed her eyes. Good. There are 2 more, Elias added. Vendors, facilitators, clean paperwork, dirty intent. Do it properly, she said. No shortcuts. Inside the hotel, the changes began to settle. A small plaque appeared near the concierge desk. Not ornate, not celebratory. Silent response protocols available. Ask any staff member, guests barely noticed it. Employees did. Matilda visited the hotel the day the foundation paperwork was finalized. She stood in the lobby holding Silas's hand, light scattering across the floor around her shoes. Constance approached without entourage. She knelt so her eyes were level with Matilda's and signed carefully, a little stiff but sincere. Your father keeps people safe. Matilda studied her, then signed back. He always do. Constance smiled, something warm and unfamiliar loosening in her chest. The foundation launched without cameras. Scholarships first, therapy grants, equipment access, then partnerships with schools and clinics that already knew how to work quietly. Silas insisted on one rule: no photographs of Matilda. Let her be a child, he said. At home, life shifted in small, merciful ways. Silas came home earlier. Bills stopped feeling like ambushes. Evenings stretched long enough for stories signed slowly under soft light. One night, Matilda asked a question that made him pause. Bad man come back? Silas considered his answer. Maybe not him, he signed, but bad systems try. She thought for a moment. We fix them. He smiled. Yes. Back at the Whitmore Grand, Constance stood alone in the lobby after midnight, watching reflections ripple across the marble. She saw herself clearly now, not elevated, not insulated. Beside her reflection, she saw Silas moving through the space with practiced ease. Not powerful. Responsible. The building felt different. Not safer because of guards or cameras. Safer because attention had replaced assumption. Because silence had been given a language. Because invisible people were no longer ignored. Constance understood then that architecture was not walls or ceilings. It was behavior. And for the first time in her career, she felt she was building something that might actually last. The reckoning did not arrive with sirens. It arrived with calendars. Meetings multiplied, then shifted, then vanished altogether. Invitations arrived without agendas. Agendas arrived without decisions. Decisions were postponed in the careful language of people who believed time would soften consequences. Constance Whitmore read every message herself. She had learned in the weeks since the incident that avoidance had a shape. It looked like concern. It sounded like prudence. It called itself stability. At 9 o'clock a.m., she walked into the boardroom alone. No advisors, no prepared remarks, just a tablet in her hand and the quiet authority of someone who had already faced the worst possible outcome and survived it. The room stilled. Constance did not sit. This is not a discussion about reputation, she said, placing the tablet on the table. It's an accounting. She tapped the screen. Footage filled the wall display, time-stamped, annotated, stripped of drama. Access approvals granted outside protocol, camera alerts suppressed. Secure archives opened and copied months before Leon Hale ever stepped into the building. A name appeared. Senior Vice President, Finance. The air shifted. This could be misinterpreted, someone began. Constance raised a hand. Not sharply, not angrily, simply enough. No, she said. This is intent. She walked them through it with precision. Money paths, vendor contracts, private meetings disguised as audits. The evidence spoke without her needing to raise her voice. When she finished, the room was silent. And your plan? A board member asked carefully. Immediate termination, Constance said. No severance. Full cooperation with the investigation. A public statement that tells the truth. The market, another voice started. Will react, Constance finished. Markets always do. Trust doesn't recover from lies. The vote followed. It was not unanimous. It did not need to be. By noon, the arrest was public. By early afternoon, the stock dipped. By evening, the calls began from partners, donors, peers, each one a variation on the same question. Couldn't this have been handled more quietly? Constance answered none of them. Instead, she went downstairs. Silas Henry was in a training room, sleeves rolled, hands moving with unhurried clarity as he spoke to a small group of employees. He was explaining the difference between urgency and panic. Urgency, had he said, is knowing what to do. Panic is forgetting that you ever knew. Constance stood at the back and listened. This, she realized, was leadership without ornament. No podium, no applause, just attention turned into action. When the session ended, Silas noticed her. They made the arrest, she said. Silas nodded once. They always do. Eventually. They're going to look closely now, Constance added, at everything. Good, Silas said. Sunlight shows cracks early. He hesitated, then added, It won't feel good. Constance smiled faintly. It already doesn't. The press conference the next morning was brief. Constance stood alone behind the podium, the Whitmore logo stark behind her. Questions came fast about failures, about responsibility, about how a CEO could nearly be coerced in her own lobby. She answered plainly, Yes, our systems failed. Yes, someone inside betrayed our trust. No, we will not minimize it. When asked who had saved her life, she didn't deflect. A member of our maintenance staff, she said. A father, a man who paid attention. That sentence traveled farther than any carefully crafted headline. Inside the hotel, something subtle changed. Employees straightened. Conversations paused when Silas passed us by it. Not out of awe, but awareness. People who had spent years unseen felt the space around them widen, just enough to breathe. Silas felt the pressure of it too. Attention was a weight, expectation followed. He kept the same hours, walked the same routes, listened more than he spoke. At home, Matilda noticed the difference before he explained it. People were looking at him now. One evening, as they ate dinner, she signed a question he hadn't expected. People see you? He nodded. Yeah. She studied him carefully, her gaze serious. You still you? Silas smiled. Always. She considered that, then nodded, satisfied. Back at the Whitmore Grand, Constance stood alone in the lobby late one night. The marble reflected the ceiling lights, the passing figures, her own outline. She watched people move, security adjusting positions without prompting, staff creating space without drama, maintenance pausing to help without being asked. Attention, she understood, was contagious. The reckoning had not broken the building, it had stripped it, and what remained felt more honest for it. But Constance also knew this was not the end. Systems resisted change the way muscles resisted cold, by tightening. There would be attempts to soften edges, to return to how things were done. There always were. She would have to answer them, and this time she would not answer alone. Silas was already building something that did not depend on permission. And that, Constance thought as she watched the lobby settle into its night rhythm, was the most dangerous change of all. The resistance did not arrive loudly. It came disguised as concern. An email marked thoughtful suggestion, a meeting request labeled alignment, a phrase repeated often enough to sound reasonable. Operational balance. Silas Henry noticed the shift before anyone said its name. A training session quietly postponed. A VIP request approved without the usual checks. A department head asking carefully whether all this was still necessary now that the crisis had passed. Nothing illegal, nothing dramatic, just erosion. Silas didn't argue. He documented. He kept dates, time when, rationales, patterns. He knew from experience that systems rarely failed all at once. They failed by accommodation, by the slow reintroduction of habits that had once been dangerous but felt familiar. One afternoon, he brought the folder to Constance. She didn't open it immediately. She set it on the small table by her office window and watched the city for a long moment. The light shifted as clouds passed, turning glass into water and back again. "They're testing whether this was fear," she said quietly, "or conviction." Silas nodded. "Most people hope it was fear." She opened the folder. By the third page, her jaw tightened. By the 10th, her posture changed. Not defensive, not angry, but resolved. "They're not malicious," she said. "They're comfortable." "Comfort is persistent," Silas replied. "It waits for attention to fade." Constance closed the folder. "Then we don't let it fade." That evening, she called a leadership forum. Not a board meeting, not a press event, no cameras, no prepared speeches. Department heads, shift supervisors, frontline leads, people who made daily decisions, not quarterly promises. Constance stood at the front of the room without a podium. "I don't want assurances," she said. "I want friction." The room stilled. "Where do protocols slow you down?" she asked. "Where do you hesitate to report? Where does safety feel theoretical instead of practical?" The answers came cautiously at first, then faster. A concierge admitted she'd been pressured to reroute a VIP late at night. A facilities manager described being told to use judgment when security flags inconvenienced guests. A junior supervisor confessed he didn't escalate concerned because he didn't want to look incompetent. Constance listened without interruption. When the room emptied, she turned to Silas. "Your turn," she said. Silas stepped forward. No slides, no notes. "Safety isn't a department," he said. "It's a habit. If it only exists during emergencies, it will fail when things feel normal." He held up a small laminated card. 4 simple signs printed clearly. "Help. Danger. Don't look. Follow me." "These aren't symbols of weakness," he continued. "They're permissions. To act early. To slow things down. To buy time." Someone asked the question that always came. "What if we're wrong?" Silas met their eyes. "Then we pause someone's day," he said. "We learn. We adjust. But if we're right and we wait, we don't get to apologize." The silence that followed wasn't fear. It was understanding. 2 days later, the memo arrived. Carefully worded, polite, concerned. It suggested a review of the silent protocol's continued necessity in light of operational efficiency. Constance read it once. Then she forwarded it, with Silas's documentation attached, to every senior leader in the organization. Her reply was brief. "Necessity is not determined by comfort. Protocols remain. Reviews will measure compliance, not convenience." There were no further memos. The real test came without announcement. A raised voice near the elevators late one evening, a VIP insisting on privacy, a security guard noticing a hand held at the wrong angle inside a jacket. Nothing overt, until it was. The front desk agent didn't shout, didn't freeze, didn't escalate publicly. She used the system, a maintenance delay, a polite reroute, security repositioned without urgency, a calm request to step aside. The situation dissolved before it could sharpen. No report made the news. Silas heard about it the next morning, quietly, from Audrey Finn. "Worked," she said. Silas wrote one word in his notebook. Yes, at home, the changes felt different. Matilda noticed the rhythm before the reasons. Dinner earlier, fewer late nights, a father who listened with the same attention he once reserved for corners and reflections. One night, she signed something that surprised him. You help building listen. Silas nodded. Yeah, she thought about that. Then building help people. He smiled. Yes, Back at the Whitmore Grand, Constance walked the lobby with Silas after midnight. Not ceremonially, just walking. You're building something that won't love you back, she said. Silas smiled faintly. It doesn't have to. It just has to hold. They stopped near the concierge desk where the marble reflected them both clearly. Equal height, equal presence. This is what power should feel like, Constance said softly. Silas considered it. Temporary, borrowed, accountable. She nodded. The lobby settled into its night rhythm. Guests passed through unaware. Employees moved with quiet confidence. For the first time, the building felt less like a monument and more like a promise. And promises Silas knew were strongest when they were tested and kept. The bill arrived without ceremony. No envelope, no signature line. Just a gradual tightening of air, the kind you felt before a storm, when everything looked the same but refused to behave the same way again. For Constance Whitmore, the price of truth came in three forms: numbers, narratives, and names. The numbers came first. A revised earnings call, a cautious downgrade. Analysts praising ethical leadership while adjusting expectations was in quieter language. The stock dipped, recovered halfway, then settled into a narrow band as if deciding whether integrity was a risk or an asset. Constance watched the charts without expression. Numbers were honest in their own way. They didn't pretend to care. The narratives came next. Headlines framed the story differently depending on who was speaking. Some called her decisive, others reckless. A few suggested the incident had been exaggerated to justify internal restructuring. The implication hovered, unspoken but sharp. Power rarely changed hands without spectacle. She answered none of it. She had learned that arguing with narratives only fed them. The names came last. Partners who asked to pause, donors who went quiet, executives at peer companies who suddenly discovered scheduling conflicts. People she had shared tables with for years now spoke in careful distances. Truth, Constance realized, didn't isolate you because it was loud. It isolated you because it removed excuses. Silas Henry felt the cost in smaller increments. A delayed approval here, a budget question there. The polite suggestion that safety initiatives could be streamlined now that the immediate threat had passed. He responded the same way every time, with documentation, with patience, with clarity. Pressure, he knew, revealed priorities faster than confrontation ever could. One afternoon, Elias Corbin returned with updates. The SVP is cooperating fully, he said. Wire transfers, access logs, recorded calls. We've identified 2 additional facilitators. Employees? Constance asked. Vendors, Elias replied. Clean contracts, dirty intent, charges pending. Constance nodded. Proceed? And the public? Elias added. People prefer clean villains, she said. Systems make them uncomfortable. Elias smiled faintly. You're not wrong. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited for comment. Silas stood at a distance, not hiding, not performing. He stood where he could see exits, the habit too old to unlearn. Inside the hotel, the silent protocols became muscle memory. New hires learned them on day one, not as an add-on, but as part of how the building functioned. The foundation expanded quietly. Applications arrived from families who had learned not to ask. Therapists and educators partnered without fanfare, relieved to see funding arrive without cameras attached. The work grew roots instead of headlines. At home, the weight settled differently. Matilda noticed before Silas explained it. The way his shoulders tightened some evenings, the pauses in his hands mid-sign when thoughts crowded in. One night, she signed carefully. You sad? Silas shook his head. No. She studied him, unconvinced. Then heavy? He smiled, honest now. Yes, he signed. A little. She reached out and placed her small hand over his. Heavy mean important. His throat tightened. Yeah, he signed back. Very important. The final cost arrived as an offer, a closed-door meeting, familiar faces. A suggestion framed as compromise, a return to normal operations in exchange for stability. The language was gentle, reasonable, designed to sound like relief. Constance listened without interruption. When it ended, she stood. No, she said. Not loudly, not angrily, simply. This is the price, she continued. We pay it once or we pay it forever. Silas watched her say it, not with defiance, but with clarity. He recognized the posture. It was the same one Constance had held in the lobby when she chose not to scream. That night, the city outside her window felt different. Less like an audience, more like a responsibility. Truth had demanded its due, and she had paid. Silas walked the lobby late, the marble reflecting light and movement with impartial accuracy. He watched employees work, security adjusting positions without prompting, staff creating space without drama, maintenance pausing to help without being asked. Attention had become habit. He wrote a single line in his notebook. Cost accepted. Because the price of truth was not measured in stock points or headlines. It was measured in whether you kept building after the applause faded. And they were still building. Legacy did not arrive with applause. It arrived on a quiet morning when the lobby of the Whitmore Grand looked exactly the way it always had and felt entirely different. Employees gathered near the concierge desk in small clusters. Maintenance staff stood beside security. Front desk agents paused between check-ins. No one had been ordered to attend. No one had been told this was important. That was how Constance Whitmore wanted it. The marble floor gleamed beneath their shoes, eyes reflecting light, movement, faces. The same floor that had once carried a silent plea now carried something steadier. A plaque had been mounted beside the desk. Not large, not decorative. No names carved in praise. Just words. Silent response protocols. Your safety matters. Ask any staff member. Constance stood slightly to the side, hands folded, posture unguarded. For the first time in years, she did not feel the need to command the room. Silas Henry stood near the front with Matilda beside him. Her small hand wrapped around his fingers, her gaze alert, curious, absorbing everything without sound. She did not know the details of what had happened months earlier. She knew something more accurate. Her father was calm. Audrey Finn spoke briefly, explaining the protocols, the systems, the reasons. Her voice was measured, her words spare. This was not a celebration. It was an acknowledgement. Then Constance stepped forward. I believed power meant distance, she said. I believed control came from standing above the work. She paused, letting the quiet hold. I was wrong. Control comes from understanding the work closely enough to protect the people doing it. Her eyes moved to Sias. The person who saved my life did not do so because of authority, she continued. He did it because he paid attention, because he had learned to listen to silence long before the rest of us thought it mattered. She turned toward Matilda. Instead of speaking, Constance signed. Carefully, deliberately. Thank you. Matilda's eyes widened. She looked up at Silas, seeking confirmation. He nodded. She smiled and signed back, You welcome? There was no applause, just a soft release of breath moving through the room, a shared understanding that something important had been named without being dramatized. People returned to work. That was the point. Later, when the lobby emptied, Constance stood alone where it had all begun. The marble reflected her outline clearly now, without distortion. She knelt and placed her palm against the stone, feeling its cool steadiness. This floor had witnessed fear. It had also witnessed restraint. Behind her, footsteps approached. Silas stopped a respectful distance away. You didn't have to name the foundation after her, he said quietly. I know, Constance replied. I wanted to. Silas nodded. She'll grow into it. I hope, Constance said, she grows into a world where no one has to be brave just to be heard. Silas considered that. We're working on it. That evening, Silas sat on the floor of their apartment with Matilda, practicing new signs she had learned from other children. Her hands moved quickly now, confident, playful. She signed about the lobby, about the lights, about the woman who spoke with her hands. Then she paused and signed more slowly. You still clean floors? Silas smiled. Yeah. Different floors, same work. She nodded, satisfied. When Matilda fell asleep, Silas sat beside her bed for a long time, watching her breathe. The apartment was quiet, ordinary, safe. He thought about the reflection in the marble, about the moment silence became a request, about the choice not to look away. Across the city, Constance Whitmore sat at her desk, drafting policies instead of projections, systems instead of slogans. She worked slowly, aware now that every line mattered because people would live inside it. Power, she had learned, was not something you possessed. It was something you borrowed from people who trusted you not to waste it. Night settled over the city. Lights flickered on in windows across the skyline. Millions of lives continued, unseen and essential. At the Whitmore Grand, the night shift janitor began his rounds. He pushed his cart. He mopped the floors. The marble reflected him clearly. A man who mattered. Not because he had been noticed once, but because the system now noticed everyone. The story did not end with rescue. It ended with responsibility. With silence that spoke. With attention that endured. And with the simple, difficult promise that once you learn how to see, you never choose blindness again.